Does it? Remember our verse, our last verse had this present evil world, this present evil world? Yes. But we're still talking about the children of Israel, and they are, where are the children of Israel? They are in, class? Egypt. They're in Egypt. And what are they in Egypt? What are they doing in Egypt? Rachel, what are they? Huh? What are they doing? Making stones, making bricks, hauling big stones around. What's another thing we could say about them in Egypt? Serenity. Peasants. Okay, they're very, very poor. What's another word? Slaves. That's right. So they are slaves in Egypt. Let's see if my tape works today. Okay, they're slaves in Egypt. And while they were slaves in Egypt, before they even asked for help at all, God started working. And the way He started working was by letting a baby boy be born and kept alive. Remember what the Egyptians were doing? Remember what they said had to happen to all the boys that were born? All the Israelite boys that were born? What was supposed to happen to all the Israelite boys that were born? Daniel? They died. They would let girls be born, but no boys. That's evil. That's wicked. But God let one be born and let him be rescued by the king's daughter, right? And his name was Moses. He grew up in the palace. And so he didn't live with the Israelites in slavery. He lived in the palace with riches and ease and all of that, while all of his relatives, they didn't kill all the boys, but they tried to. They tried to kill lots and lots of them. But all the men and everyone else was very poor. They didn't have hardly anything. And they had to work in slavery. And one day, or at some point, Moses had a choice, didn't he? He had to choose. Would he stay with what's easy in Egypt, or would he leave what's easy and identify himself, join the people of God, even though they are in slavery? What choice did he make, Daniel? In Egypt, he stayed where it was easy. Moses' choice: stay where it's easy in the palace, or leave the palace and be with God's people where it's hard. He left. Yeah, he left. And it got bad for him. He even had to leave the whole country. The king wanted to kill him. And so he left that, and he went, and he lived for many, many years in the wilderness, and he led sheep around, right? He was a shepherd. He found a man who let him live with him, and then the man let him marry one of his daughters. And so Moses and his wife, Moses led the sheep around the wilderness, and one day, many, many years later, Moses was 80 years old, and he saw, what did he see? Sky? A burning bush. That what? Something was different about this burning bush. Serenity? It was on fire, but it wasn't burning up, right? You gonna add to that? I'm sorry? The bush was talking. Well, yes, not exactly the bush talking, but as Moses got close, a voice came out of the bush, and whose voice was in the bush? Who was there? Who did Moses meet there? Class, he met God. That's right. And God, and there's some surprises there, right? That'd be a surprise. But one surprise that we all tried to learn is that God is alive, and He knows what's going on. And then Moses had to take his shoes off, because God is holy, and you can't just, no one can just walk into heaven or go somewhere that God is, because we're all sinners. And then God had a plan. Remember, he had a plan. He said, I've got a plan. I'm gonna take my people that I've called by my name, and I'm going to take them out of Egypt. Moses surely thought that it would be impossible to do that, but God had a plan, and if anybody can do it, it would have to be God, because no other human way could do it. And then God gave Moses some signs that he could, to prove to him that he was with him, and also that Moses could show the children of Israel and the king of Egypt that God was for real. And so Moses went into Egypt, and we learned about this last week, went to the king and said to the king, Jehovah, the God of Israel, says, let my people go. And what did the king say? What did he say? We can show it with our heads, can't we? No, sirree. He said no. He said no. But should you ever say no to God? No. We should never say no to God, should we? The king said no. He said, who is the Lord? And Moses told him some things. Really, first they just asked for a 3-day vacation. But after that, Pharaoh was like, the king Pharaoh said, no way. And then God was like, I'm not just going to take it 3 days. I'm taking my people out of here. And one time after another, Pharaoh resisted the Lord, right? And last week, we had my visual that was as tall as me, right? It just kept going down, one thing after another after another. God was judging the people of Egypt, especially judging the Pharaoh, showing him he should give in to God, but he didn't give in. He resisted, he resisted, he resisted, and one plague or judgment, and then another one, and another one, and another one. We talked about 9 judgments. The last one, the whole land of Israel, the whole land of Egypt, the whole land, all the land where the Egyptians lived was pitch black all day long. Not just at night, all day long for 3 days in a row. But it was normal where the Israelites lived. And that had been happening for 3 or 4 of the judgments. And that was proof to Pharaoh that this wasn't any coincidence. God was dealing with him, and Pharaoh kept saying no. Now, before we go any further, I want us to think about how, I gotta figure out where to put this.
Just put it on the diesel.
Yeah, I guess we can put it there. How? So the children of Israel, they were slaves, right? They were slaves in Egypt. And we have been talking for a while about how that in a sense, every human being is a slave. Now, we don't have cuffs on our wrist or balls and chains on our ankles, but every human being is a slave to something. Remember what that is? What is it that, without any outside help, we have no control over? It has control over us. What is it? We have some older students here. What is it? Soleil? Soleil? What is it? The devil. The devil. And that's true. And what else? Serenity? Sin. Sin controls us, doesn't it? We're born sinners. Every single one of us is born a sinner. We get to be a little bit old enough, and what do we do? We grab things for ourselves. We say, that's mine. Right? Some of you are old enough that you have younger nephews or nieces or brothers and sisters, and they crawl around and they mine. Right? They're selfish. They're selfish. Should people be selfish? No. But we are, because we're sinners. Then they get to be a little bit older, and they are asked a question, but they think, if I say the truth, I might get in trouble. So instead, I'm gonna lie. How many of you have ever lied? We have, haven't we? And is lying a sin? It is. It is a sin. And if something doesn't save us from our lies, we will just lie anytime we think it will help us. And our lies will be in control of us. Our pride will be in control of us. And we will be like the Israelites were in Egypt, slaves. But not slaves to a king, not slaves that have a whip, not slaves that have to carry bricks and stones around, slaves to our sin. Now, in the old days, and even today, I've read stories about in other countries, there is still slavery going on. Yes, other countries, there are still people that are slaves, and this is how it works out sometimes. There'll be a family, and there's a large number of kids in the family, and one of the younger ones gets to be old enough to have to eat a lot of food, but he's not old enough to work hard, and his family will make a very hard decision to sell their son to somebody else who could feed them, but then that son has to work for them, and that other person owns them. Imagine if that was your family. You know what you would probably do? You would be thinking, someday I'm going to work hard enough and get rich enough so that I could go and buy my younger brother from that person, and then they could be free, right? That's what we would think. And that's the way it is. Many times, in the Bible times, somebody could sell themselves to somebody else because they were too poor, but somebody else could come along and buy them with money. And when they did buy them with money, they would, the word that is used to describe that is to redeem them. So a person could sell himself into slavery, or his parents, maybe because they didn't have enough money, or maybe they owed bills and the child would have to go into slavery, but then somebody else could come along and, say the word with me, redeem them. They could redeem them. Now, why would somebody redeem somebody? For one, the person that's redeemed is helpless, right? There's nothing they can do to be free. The second reason would be because the person loves them. Maybe it is a brother or sister, or maybe it's somebody that just cares a real lot about those people. And the third thing about being redeemed would be, once you were redeemed, imagine if that was you, and somebody came along, every day you had chores to do around somebody else's house. You couldn't just go on vacation whenever you wanted. You couldn't do anything you wanted. You had to do what your master would tell you to do. Maybe they were a kind master, but they were still your master. But is sin a kind master? Is the devil a kind master? No, he's not. Were the Egyptians kind masters? No, they were not. So, if that was you, and you were a slave, but somebody came along and said, I'm going to pay so that you can be redeemed, you can be free from this master, and I'm going to do that because I care about you and love you. Once that took place, you would be indebted. You would owe the person that freed you your life, wouldn't you? Without them, you would have been a slave. So, God said that He was going to redeem His children. You know how many there were? Over 2 million. That's like the whole city of Chicago. Over 2 million. God said, I'm going to redeem them. What do you think that would cost? What would that cost to redeem over 2 million people? Do you think there's enough money to do that? Do you think the king would say, sure, you can just buy all my workers? He's not going to say that. maybe he would sell one or two, but he's not going to sell all the men that work. He's not going to let them be paid for. And beside that, he had already said no, didn't he? He said no, 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 no. So God had to do something very special because it was impossible. It was basically impossible. There wasn't a country in the world that cared about them. There wasn't a country in the world that was strong enough to deliver them. There was only one person in the whole wide world that cared about the children of Israel. And who was that? I mean, he's a person, but he's not a human. Who was it that cared about them? God. And did God have enough power to redeem the children of Israel out of Egypt? He did. He didn't even have to pay Pharaoh, but he did have to use his power and authority to get the children of Israel out of Egypt. And this is how it happened. Remember, there was judgment after judgment. There was frogs, there was lice, there was flies, the animals died, there was hail, there was locusts that ate up all the green stuff, there was sores, boils on their skin, there was darkness for 3 days, and every time Pharaoh said no. Maybe a couple people were saying to Pharaoh, we shouldn't do this, but even the children of Egypt, the people of Egypt, they weren't saying, Pharaoh, stop, just let them go. They weren't saying that. Finally, God said, remember last week when we ended, Pharaoh said to Moses, leave and don't let me ever see your face again. That's a bad place to get into when you're saying to God, I don't want you around. That's a bad place to be in. Well, God said to Moses, this is what you need to do. Tell the children of Israel that they need to take a lamb out of their flock. Now, the children of Israel were slaves, right? Did they have money sitting in their houses? If they had money, they could get themselves free, could they? They didn't have money. They didn't really even have houses, just little huts, places where they lived. They did have some flocks. That's the only thing they had was their flocks. Beside that, they just went and worked for Egypt all the time. And God said, take a lamb out of your flock. Make sure that it doesn't have a broken leg or anything like that, or a curled ear, anything like this. It needs to be a male lamb, and it needs to be perfectly whole. And what I want you to do is I want you to slaughter it and prepare to eat it for a very special dinner. So the children of Israel heard what Moses said, and they pulled out a lamb. They watched it to make sure that it didn't have anything wrong with it. And on a certain night, all the families of Egypt, they took that special lamb and they slaughtered it, and they caught the blood that comes out of the animal when they kill it, and they got the lamb ready to eat a very special dinner. But God said, I want you to catch that blood, and I want you to catch it in a bowl, and then I want you to sprinkle or brush the blood across the top of your door, and I want you to brush blood on the doorposts of your door, all the way around the door. I want you to brush the blood from that lamb, that perfect lamb, right there. Because here's what's going to happen. I'm sending an angel through the whole land, but he's not a friendly angel. This angel is going to go from house to house to house, and any houses that don't have blood over the door, he's going to take his spiritual whatever, his power, and he's going to kill all the firstborn boys in every house that has no blood over it. Now that sounds awful, but how many firstborn boys of the Israelites were killed over the many years before? Lots and lots and lots of them. Remember? lots of boys. They just throw them in the river, kill them, whatever. God is finally saying, I'm going to kill the firstborn sons of Egypt in every house that doesn't have the blood over it. Now, I don't know if there was. I think there might have been, actually, some people that weren't Israelites, but they heard. The Bible talks about a mixed multitude that went out with them. And some of these people, they might have heard, oh, and they put blood over their door. Any house that had blood over it, everybody inside the house was safe. But the houses that didn't have the blood over it, the firstborn sons died. And so the children of Israel did that. They brushed the blood over. They went into their house. They began to cook that special dinner and cook some bread very quickly. And the Bible says even that they were supposed to load up the little belongings that they had. They were supposed to put them on their backs and just wait there. Could you imagine having a big backpack on, or something like a backpack on your back, and you're trying to eat with a backpack on? What was going to happen? They didn't know. They did what Moses said God said to do, and so they did that. And through that night, the angel of the Lord came through, and one by one, house after house after house of the Egyptians, the king's house, Pharaoh's house, the poorest Egyptian's house, all the way through the whole land. I don't know how it happened, but firstborn sons maybe gasped or cried, and then they died. And in that one judgment, Pharaoh, what had Pharaoh been saying? No, no, no. But the children of Egypt came to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh himself said, okay, now you have to go. You have to go and take whatever you want with you. And the children of Israel were able to ask Egyptians for some gold or silver. And as all the children of Israel left Egypt, they took gold and silver and wealth from the Egyptians. Pharaoh said, get out and go. And that's how God redeemed the children of Israel. Did he pay money to Pharaoh? No. But he used his might and his power. And why did he redeem the children of Israel? Because he loved them. He chose them to love. Now, what should the children of Israel do for the rest of their lives? Everything that God says, right? And this is a beautiful picture of us even. So here we have some windows in this house, and this window says slaves to Pharaoh. Who were the slaves to Pharaoh? The Israelites, right? But what does this window say? Slaves to Satan. Who are slaves to Satan? Everybody is. Not just Israelites. Everybody's a slave to Satan. Here we have, they had to get a perfect lamb, right? And they had to butcher the lamb and catch the blood. And that perfect lamb. Every firstborn son in there, could you imagine how his heart felt? It might have hurt a little bit to have to kill that lamb and eat that meal. But when the death angel came, whoo, and he didn't die, he was thankful for that lamb, wasn't he? He was. But for us, we don't need a lamb. The children of Israel, they were supposed to, every year, they were supposed to remember the Passover. They called it the Passover because the angel would pass over the houses where the blood was on the door. And every year they would have a special meal at the Passover. Even Jesus, when he was on the earth, he had a special meal. He celebrated the Passover for many, many years. But his last meal was a Passover, and in that he said, he pointed out that he was going to be the lamb. Jesus. Did Jesus shed his blood? He did. We said that when we were looking at the verse, right? The precious blood of Christ. When did he shed his blood? On the cross. So, we are slaves to sin. Did God pay sin or pay Satan anything? No, he didn't. But he spent, didn't he? He gave his own Son, the sinless Savior, died and shed his blood. And here they had sprinkled blood, and that saved them. In that moment it saved them. Now listen, what if, I don't think there was, but what if there was somebody who heard about it and they said, that's interesting. And let's say they killed the lamb so that they could have a meal, but they thought, this is just really silly to put this blood over the door. I'm not going to do that. Let's just eat our meal. What would have happened? The firstborn son in that house would have died, wouldn't he? Because even though they knew about it, they didn't obey. They didn't do what was said. And there are people in the world today that know about Jesus, but they don't trust in Jesus. They think a lot of different things. The devil has lots and lots of different things that he tells people that they can do instead of just only trusting in Jesus. But we have Bible clubs so that you can hear week after week after week how that there's only one way to be free from sin. There's only one way to be on your way to heaven, and it's because God loved you so much. Did he need to love us? No. But he loved us so much that he gave his Son. Jesus loved us so much that he left heaven, came to earth, died on the cross, shed his blood. And we can know that story, but there has to be a time where we say, that story is true to me. I'm going to turn from my sin. I'm going to give my life over to Jesus who died for me. Remember? Somebody redeems you, you owe your life to them. And when you recognize that Jesus died for you and you turn from your sin and believe on him and ask for his forgiveness, he will forgive you and he will expect you then to live for him for the rest of your life. He shed his blood, and we have to trust his blood. We have to trust in him and not in our own thoughts or our own ideas. We have to trust in what the Bible tells us about how we can be saved from our sin and be on our way to heaven. We have to turn from our sin and believe on Jesus who paid the price. He paid the price so that we could be free from Satan and from our sin. He redeemed us. What does our verse say? Ye were not redeemed with corruptible things as silver and gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. That's more of the words around our verse. Christ was like a lamb without blemish and without spot. Would there be enough money in the whole wide world to pay to get rid of everybody's sin? There, gold, silver, millions, billions, trillions, whatever's after that, all the money in the world wouldn't be enough to free us from our sin and from Satan. Only the most precious thing in the world, only the one person who never sinned could give his life and shed his blood so that everyone else who does have sin could be, and trust in him, could be free from their sin. Have you believed on Jesus? Have you turned from your sin and believed on him? You need to do that. Each week we talk about this, and over time, some things might make sense to you. As soon as you do, if you have questions, maybe something doesn't make sense to you, you can talk to me, or if I'm too scared to talk to you, you can talk to Mrs. Vogelin, or Miss Lauren, or Miss Amanda, or Miss Laura, and ask us about the lessons. Ask us about what it means to be saved. Ask us about our sin, about your sin, and how you can be free from your sin and from the slavery that Satan has each person in the world in who hasn't turned to Jesus. So I want you to be thinking about that. Don't put it off. Think about it. And when God works in your heart and says you need to do something about that, we are here ready to help you understand all about it.